News, and Georgia Calvin-Smith. Georgia.
Thanks very much, Mark. This is Africa News. And several African heads of state have addressed the UN General Assembly today. Tensions between DRC and Rwanda are amongst the issues raised, whilst diplomats also discuss Central African Republic's crisis on the sidelines. Also, several deaths have been reported in Sudan during a third day of violent clashes over fuel subsidy cuts. And Kenyans mourn their dead as the first burials of the victims of the Westgate Mall siege are held. First up, diplomatic fingers were being pointed today at the UN General Assembly. Speaking at the annual meeting of world leaders in New York, the president of Democratic Republic of Congo on Wednesday accused neighbouring Rwanda of never-ending aggression. There's international concern about the most recent clashes between M23 rebels and the army in eastern DRC. UN experts have accused Rwanda of backing the insurgents, though Kigali denies this. Diplomats also met on the sidelines to discuss the situation in Central African Republic, a crisis that has today been summed up as being desperate. Douglas Herbert has more.
This is all just the latest incarnation, if you want to put it in a much broader context, of a war that has been going on essentially, that is a legacy of the Rwandan genocide, dating all the way back to 1994. Congo has just had an endless succession of civil conflicts and wars that have drawn in countries from around the region, sometimes 6 to 9 countries, all the neighbors. Now, they have, in the past few days, also signed an agreement not to interfere in the internal affairs, in domestic affairs of other countries in the region. So we're going to see if that agreement actually comes to the fruition in the sense of other countries not intervening. But it's a very, very complicated, perhaps one of the most complicated conflicts, and it has defied any easy resolution over the past 2 decades, really.
Now, Doug, on the sidelines of the General Assembly's diplomats were also meeting today to discuss the situation in Central African Republic. And we're hearing the crisis there has been summed up as being desperate.
Even stronger terms than desperate have been used. Anarchy, catastrophe. We've had François Hollande himself saying that this is a country that could become a new Somalia. And we know that that is a country that was basically sunk into 2 decades of vicious civil war and conflict. Why? Because the world basically stood by and there was no intervention. At least that's the message from French officials, European officials who have visited the country. And yes, and its prime minister, its acting prime minister, basically met with reporters today and described a situation that is verging on anarchic and desperate, and they're sounding the alarm, trying to mobilize basically the international community to bolster the presence of peacekeeping troops that are already present in the country. They want to up it to about 3,500 troops from a current level of about just over 1,000. They say this is absolutely necessary, the bare minimum needed, just to try to restore security to this country, because essentially right now it's enthralled to this rebel group which swept through the capital in March, deposed the president, sent him fleeing into exile. The prime minister was allowed to stay on, but it's basically he's ruling a country that is enthralled to these rebels right now. He's not really controlling much of a country, and there's not much of an army as well.
Well, a little earlier on, Frans van Kant actually spoke to the Prime Minister of Central African Republic. He expressed his concerns about the recent religious clashes in his country.
I fear that some will use religion as a pretext for violence. Christians and Muslims have always lived peacefully side by side in our country, and we have to do all we can to prevent a conflict between these two communities.
Well, Frans van Kant will be taking a closer look at the crisis in Central African Republic tomorrow, Thursday, on the Frans van Kant debate. You can catch that at 1900 hours Paris time. Now, Burkina Faso's President Blaise Compaoré has also addressed the UN General Assembly today. He urged African states to improve their coordination in fighting extremism. But when asked about his future plans for his office, he remained vague.
This Wednesday, Blaise Compaoré addressed the UN General Assembly. A little earlier, he gave an interview to France 24, in which he refused to say that he would not run again for a third mandate in 2015, even though his candidacy would be unconstitutional.
I think the most important issue today is what I need to do in the coming month. But 2015 still seems quite far away to organize debates about what will happen at the end of my mandate.
The opposition believes Compaoré wants to change the constitution so the number of presidential mandates is no longer limited to 2. It claims he wants to create a Senate with that specific aim. We spoke to one of Burkina Faso's opposition leaders, Benewende Sankara.
We believe that right now, creating a Senate is pointless and irrelevant. There are other priorities. Life here is extremely expensive. We can't put all our children in school. There's a lack of infrastructure. We want a country where everyone has enough to eat and drink, where there's hope and jobs and good schools and hospitals.
Compaoré, who's been in power for 26 years, has often been a mediator in West African conflicts, most recently in Mali, where he helped to broker the deal between Bamako and the Tuareg rebels. His role as a mediator has won him appreciation from Western powers. But in his country, he's come under much criticism, especially following riots and an army mutiny in 2011.
Today, Kenya began 3 days of mourning for the victims of the 4-day-long Westgate Mall hostage-taking. As the first funerals for the 67 victims were held, some were still waiting for news of their loved ones. Catherine Norris-Trent sent us this report.
After the Westgate slaughter, now comes Kenya's outpouring of grief. Here, Nairobi's Indian community are mourning 2 of their friends. 17-year-old Pavraj and his grandmother, both shot dead by militants in the mall.
Feeling heartbroken. Yeah, he was a really good friend of ours. Like, why did it happen, you know? Why now? Why all this happened?
We feel very bad. We feel very emotional.
So far, 30 members of Kenya's wealthy Asian community are known to have perished in the siege. Their cremation ceremonies are now taking place. Kenya is in mourning, but many fear the death toll could rise. Well, the mourning has already started for some. For other relatives and friends of those caught up in the Westgate Mall attack, the agony continues. People are still arriving here at Nairobi City Mortuary to find out what's happened to those still unaccounted for. It's clear there are still many people missing after the siege, not yet counted in the official death toll. Dorothy has been to every hospital in the capital for news of her friend Lydia.
She told me she was shopping at the mall. So after that, I tried contacting her, but I wasn't able to reach her. They just told me all the bodies which are here, they've already been identified. So maybe I wait for the ones which are still at the Westgate. 3 floors of the shopping centre collapsed. People here have little doubt the hunt for victims isn't over. They're bracing themselves for more bad news.
At least 7 more demonstrators have been killed in a 3rd day of protests in Khartoum and the neighbouring city of Omdurman. In total, 10 people have lost their lives in these latest demonstrations against the government's scrapping of subsidies, which has seen fuel prices almost double. Rioting reportedly erupted on Wednesday, with police firing tear gas on crowds during clashes. President Omar al-Bashir insists that without cutbacks, the country risks economic collapse. More on this, we hear from James Cocknell, who is due to release a book on Sudan after having spent many years in the region. He tells us more about Bashir's assertion the country has no choice but to cut subsidies.
That Sudan's in a pretty difficult economic situation. It all really stems from the secession of South Sudan in 2011, and the South Sudanese took with them 3/4 of the oil reserves. And the Sudanese economy just hasn't really recovered from that blow. So certainly lots of foreign advisors, from diplomats to the IMF, were encouraging Mr. Bashir to remove these subsidies. There was a partial lifting a year ago, which led to prolonged demonstrations in Khartoum and other cities. And the Sudanese political class knew that there would be a price to pay for the rise in fuel prices, and also cooking gas, which has gone up as well, which has particularly affected poor people as well. So it might have been a necessary economic decision, but it was also a very risky one, because after so many years in power since 1989, there are many in the country who want Mr. Bashir out of power.
That wraps up Africa News for me, but I will be back with more tomorrow, Mark.
Georgia, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks
Georgia
very
Calvin-Smith with Africa News. We take a short break now. After that, we return with the World News Update, plus all the day's sports, and of course our special focus feature. Stay with us, live from Paris.